Pharmaceutical operators targeting the Saudi market face a compliance deadline on June 21, 2026. By that date, regulatory frameworks will enforce a strict, updated standard. This deadline is driven by Article 3 of the new Saudi Food and Drug Authority law. It establishes the SFDA's mandate to regulate, monitor, and ensure the safety, quality, and efficacy of human drugs within its jurisdiction. The SFDA's remit includes animal health, biologicals such as vaccines and serums, medical devices, cosmetics, and bottled water. The legislation dictates a dual commitment. The authority must exercise strict regulatory control over technical standards while simultaneously informing consumers of their rights and responsibilities. A central component of this review is the SFDA's evaluation of a drug's legal status classification, specifically the distinction between prescription-only medicine and over-the-counter status. Legacy drug classifications are no longer protected by past approvals. Existing products are currently facing review under this updated, data-driven mandate. Legal classification dictates the absolute ceiling on a product's distribution potential. It defines where the drug can be physically sold and assigns the exact weight of the pharmacovigilance burden the manufacturer must carry. Any strategic proposal for market access must be explicitly mapped and submitted within the Electronic Common Technical Document, or ECTD. The Saudi Food and Drug Authority serves as the sole science-based regulator evaluating these human drug submissions. The specific battleground for determining a product's legal and distribution status is Module 1 of the ECTD, which houses the regional administrative information. Module 1 requires precise compilation of the application form, the summary of product characteristics, and the patient information leaflet. The proposed legal classification is declared directly in the initial application form. The SFDA enforces rigid permanence regarding these digital submissions. Once an ECTD baseline is established and submitted to the authority, reverting to legacy or alternate formats is prohibited. Flawlessly engineering the documentation in Module 1 is the mandatory prerequisite before a manufacturer can attempt to negotiate a drug's physical placement in the Saudi supply chain. This flowchart details the 3 regulatory silos established by the SFDA. The baseline classification is prescription-only medicine, or POM, which requires a licensed physician's written authorization before a patient can obtain the drug. Over-the-counter medicines can be obtained without a medical prescription. To qualify here, the product cannot primarily consist of complementary medicine ingredients, such as basic vitamins or plant materials. Controlled substances operate under separate governance. They are regulated by the Law of Combating Narcotic Drugs and Psychotropic Substances and require specialized tracking circulars for distribution. The theoretical legal status mathematically dictates the physical distribution status. For most medicines, physical distribution is restricted to either hospital consumption centers or community pharmacies. A highly specific subset of OTC products is permitted for sale in food retail stores, provided those facilities meet strict ambient storage conditions. A molecule's physical journey, from the warehouse down to the end patient, is predetermined by which of these regulatory silos it is assigned to during submission. This radar chart maps the 5 risk axes the SFDA uses to evaluate a drug. A spike on any of these axes triggers a mandatory POM designation. First is the direct danger axis. The authority evaluates the molecule's inherent toxicity, its potential for severe adverse reactions, and critical drug-food interactions, even when administered at normal dosage levels. Second is indirect danger. This measures the risk of the drug masking severe underlying medical conditions or the probability of breeding widespread drug resistance in the community through unsupervised use. Third is self-assessment. If a medical condition is impossible for a layperson to correctly diagnose and monitor without practitioner oversight, the treatment requires a prescription. Closely related is the complexity of patient information. If dosing instructions are too individualized or complex for the general population to understand, practitioner intervention is required. Fourth is clinical novelty. Recently authorized orphan drugs or molecules with new indications that lack broad post-market population data are restricted to clinical oversight. Finally, we have the route of administration access. Parenteral delivery methods, such as intravenous injections, demand practitioner expertise to administer safely. The matrix also weights the consequences of misuse. Even if the correct use is safe, a high health risk from the consumer exceeding the recommended dose or duration will flag the product. Hitting the threshold on any single axis locks the drug into the POM category. Reversing that status requires significant evidentiary weight. Transitioning a molecule out of the POM category requires a formal reclassification request. The mechanism for this switch varies by product type. Applicants must file a Type 2 variation for reference products, while generic products will require a Type IB variation submission. The foundational pharmacodynamic threshold for an OTC switch requires proving that the medicinal product has an adequate margin of safety and a wide therapeutic index. Diagnostically, the applicant must prove that the target condition can be easily and correctly assessed by the general public without a physician's intervention. The submission mandates the inclusion of exhaustive clinical overviews and expert reports. These must provide a critical analysis defending the safety of making the specific dose and indication available without a prescription. The SFDA requires robust non-clinical safety data that specifically models the consequences of incorrect self-medication, including delayed diagnosis of severe symptoms. Post-market experience in the general population is mandatory. The authority uses this data to fill information gaps regarding the long-term consequences of broader availability. An OTC switch is a rigorous scientific defense. It requires mathematical proof that a molecule's inherent safety profile overrides the need for physician oversight. Compiling clinical safety data is only the first phase. The SFDA evaluates the physical product information as the final barrier protecting the patient. This split-screen comparison illustrates the required translation. Even with a clinical overview, a reclassification request will fail if the patient information leaflet cannot act as a functional surrogate for a physician. The OTC leaflet must be meticulously engineered. It requires explicit, lay-friendly contraindications and absolute maximum dosing thresholds that leave no room for misinterpretation. To mitigate the risk of a patient masking a severe underlying condition, the labeling must feature explicit triggers detailing exactly when the patient must stop the medication and see a doctor. The SFDA closely examines the layout, comprehension, and overall effectiveness of this labeling in protecting patients from safety hazards before granting any reclassification. The summary of product characteristics and the patient information leaflet act as the final layer of public health defense mandated by the SFDA. Proactive data generation and meticulous ECTD compliance are the tools required to navigate the SFDA's risk matrix and authorize physical distribution. These regulations enforce market control while ensuring consumers are accurately informed of their health responsibilities. Mastering this classification architecture transforms regulatory compliance into a definitive market access advantage ahead of the 2026 mandates.